we've done 2 trainings around the state, 2-day trainings for attorneys and paralegals, housing counselors regarding the how to represent homeowners in this process as a basics training. The materials we're going to be going through today and also at the next webinar 2 weeks from today regard working your way through the loan modification process once you're working with a client, because there are certainly a lot of documents, a lot of paperwork that goes along with that. And this is really meant as an incredibly practical CLE. We're going to go through some of the forms and some of the very nitty-gritty stuff that can very easily get you off track in the process if it's not done correctly. And I speak from that from bitter experience on my end. So hopefully some of the mistakes I made along the way you guys can avoid. As I said, the webinar, the materials that you received today, I'm going to get through as much as we can today. Whatever we don't get through today, we will add on to the webinar in 2 weeks. So at the training we were at, a lot of the discussion was regarding litigation and the lack of good faith motions that can be made. And one of the points that was hammered home again and again by the various speakers and those in the crowd as well was that if you want to get to the point of litigating this stuff, you have to have impeccable records, and you have to have a very good chain of what has been done, and you have to be able to prove that as well. So in order to get to the kind of the fun stuff of litigation, at least as far as some people are concerned, you got to do the grunt work first of getting all these documents in. Before we go into the loan mod crisis, I want to just revisit, the loan mod process. I want to revisit the foreclosure crisis and talk about the timing of it. It occurred, you could pick different times, but I think fall of 2007 is a pretty good starting point. If you recall, the economy took a downturn then, the number of foreclosures shot up, and it really affected all areas. It was across all counties in New York State, and indeed it was across the country. And it hit not just for folks in cities, it was city, suburbs, country, rich, poor, black, white, old, young, male, female. It really didn't matter. It seemed to hit everyone. And so it has impacted the clients for us across the state. And the banks at that time were not ready for what was to come. They were understaffed. The folks that were on staff were undertrained. And so you had situations where our old joke was if you didn't like the answer you got, hang up and call back to the bank again, and you might get the answer you want. While that process, what the plan was to get a process in place that could be used across all the banks and standardize that process. And so that's what was developed by the Treasury Department. So real briefly, as far as what we're going to go through here today, we are going to go through the history of the Making Home Affordable program, and we're going to focus most of today on the HAMP Tier 1 program, the qualification process, the net present value test, the waterfall, which is how they go about modifying those loans, the actual modification process itself. If we have time today, we will get to the other plans under the Making Home Affordable program, as well as programs that are available outside of Making Homes Affordable. Before we start to look at all the modification possibilities, I do briefly want to talk about what your homeowner can do if they're in a situation where they are not going to be able to retain the home. One option for homeowners is bankruptcy. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about bankruptcy today. We're going to have a separate webinar specifically regarding bankruptcy and the foreclosure process and how the two relate. What's important, I think, to note for today is that depending on the type of bankruptcy that's filed and depending on the individual circumstances of the homeowner, it very well may be that a bankruptcy can be used in a situation where they are looking to get rid of the property. It also can be used in certain situations where they're looking to keep the property. So I put it on both lists. I'm not going to talk too much more about that. As I said, we will have another webinar that goes through all of that. Second option is a traditional sale or a short sale. If your homeowner has if the house is worth more than the homeowner owes to the bank, they can put that house up on the market today for sale. Even though it's in foreclosure, there is no limitation on selling that house. Anything above and beyond what's owed to the bank and closing costs, they get to take with them, just like any other sale. If, however, the homeowner owes more to the bank than the house is worth, they'd be looking at what's called a short sale. A short sale is simply where you are going to be selling the property for short of the payoff, the full payoff to the bank. So if, for instance, up here in Western New York, our property values are much lower than they would be downstate. So if you had a house that was valued at $150,000, but you owe the bank $175,000, in a short sale, what you would do is put that on the market, and let's say you got an offer for $150,000. You then have to submit that offer to the bank and have the bank approve it because they're going to be getting less than a full payoff. If the bank approves that, what sometimes the bank will do at the same time is you can negotiate where the bank says, not only are we going to take less than what is owed, but homeowner, we won't come after you for the difference. And so that both parties can walk away from that transaction without anything else hanging over their heads. If the homeowner tries to do a short sale, in the example I used, they put the house on the market at $150,000, but they can't get any offers. They drop the bid, they drop the price, and still no offers. Most banks have a program that once a house has been on the market for a certain amount of time, if it hasn't got any offers, they will consider a deed in lieu of foreclosure. What a deed in lieu of foreclosure is you are, the homeowner is giving the bank the deed to the house. So you're saying to the bank, bank, you don't have to go through the entire foreclosure process. I'm going to save you those court costs, those attorney's fees, and the time that it would take you. Because of that, what the bank will do is say, okay, homeowner, we're not going to come after you for the money that is owed. Essentially, you give us the deed to the house, we both walk away, and that's the end of the transaction. The last thing that you can do sometimes is a scheduled move-out date. I know I've had homeowners that know they're not going to be able to keep their house. However, they have children that are in school. They want the children to finish out the school year. And we've been able to negotiate a move-out date that might have been further out than would have been with the bank, with the understanding that the house will be left in broom clean condition. So some options that are possible if the homeowner is not looking to keep the house. I want to look at briefly other options if you're going to try to, the homeowner wants to keep the house, but they're not looking at a loan modification necessarily. The first of those would be refinancing. That is an entirely new loan. What it's going to do is they're going to take out a new loan. It's going to pay off the old loan. If a homeowner is in foreclosure, this is very difficult because of the fact that they will not have good credit and they have an active foreclosure currently. It'll be very hard for them to find a bank that's willing to loan them money on a refinance. However, what we have had some success with some of our clients here at Empire Justice Center is having another party that's willing to sign on as a co-borrower. So we've had instances where the husband's credit wasn't good enough, but his wife was willing to co-sign for that new loan, and that got them up to that point. Or a parent is willing to co-sign on that new loan, may allow the homeowner to get out from underneath the current mortgage. The next one I want to talk about is reinstatement. What we refer to that around here is we call it the lottery letter. If our homeowners were able to hit the lottery, how much would they have to pay tomorrow to be fully reinstated, meaning that they are caught up entirely with the bank back to just paying their normal monthly payment. If you request a reinstatement letter from bank attorneys, I just want to show you this real quickly. You want to be careful and make sure that you go through the numbers that are presented to you to make sure they're accurate. I'll show you here, this is a client of mine that I had just a couple months ago, and we asked for, he had saved up a lot of money, was going to borrow a bit from his dad, and so he asked if I could get a reinstatement letter. So I got a letter. As you can see on your screen there, it is total amount due was $54,000. Had to be reinstated. The check had to be made by the end of March of this year. Homeowner unfortunately called me the first week of April and said, I've got the money together, but the deadline had come and gone. So I called up the bank attorney and said, listen, is it possible? I know we're a couple days late. Is that number still valid? They said, no, unfortunately we have to get a new one, but we'll get it to you quickly. So again, this letter was March 5th. I get a letter in April 12th, and you can see the change in 1 month. The price has gone from, the amount has gone from $55,000 jumping up to $71,000. Now, this was a situation where the homeowner was absolutely adamant about keeping this house. However, there was no way I could go back to him and explain to him how the price could go up $16,000 without having at least asked some questions. So I called up the attorneys for the bank again and said, listen, you got to give me some understanding of how this could have jumped so quickly. Within an hour, I had another letter. This one you see was dated April 12th. I received another letter dated April 12th. This time the price had magically come back down to $55,000. Apparently what had happened was when the bank sent over the figures to the attorneys, they sent it over in a format that the attorneys weren't used to. They included a column that they shouldn't have, and so that explains the $71,000. I show you this just to point out, I don't know if my homeowner, if he had requested the payoff letter, I don't know if he would have known enough to ask. If he had only received that $71,001 and hadn't seen the $55,000, I don't know if he might have just gone ahead and tried to pay that. It's always worth digging into the numbers to find out exactly what you're looking at. If something doesn't look quite right, ask the question. So that is the reinstatement. A repayment plan typically is 3, 6, or 12 months. The way a repayment plan works is that you're going to take all the arrearages, all those missed payments, anything the bank has paid on the homeowner's behalf, and you're going to split up those arrearages evenly over the course of the repayment plan. And that's on top of making the regular monthly payment. So as a result, the homeowner's payment is going to go up and most likely substantially. These repayment plans, we rarely see those for our clients because they don't have the kind of surplus in their budget that would allow them to do so, but you may see in certain situations that come about. Temporary forbearances are typically done because of a big catastrophic event in someone's life. Illness, death, job loss. Oftentimes these will reduce payments to a very low amount, in some cases even lowering them down to where there's no payment at all for a short amount of time. Again, we talked about bankruptcy, the fact that it can be used both as a tool to retain the house or in other times to divest the house. Again, I ask you to hold off on questions regarding that. We're going to have another webinar that's going to be coming up on bankruptcy. And then lastly, what we're going to spend the rest of the time today and the next webinar talking about, which is loan modifications. Briefly, just want to talk about the history of the Making Home Affordable program. In February 2009, the Treasury Department announced the Obama administration's Homeowner Affordability and Stability Plan. That plan had 3 parts to it. It had a refinancing program that has become known as the Home Affordable Refinance Program, or HARP. They also, the second one was a loan modification program. At the time that was known as HAMP or MHA. They essentially meant the same thing because it was the only program in MHA at the time. That has since changed. There are several programs now available under Making Homes Affordable, one of which is the HAMP Tier 1 plan. And again, that's the main one, and that's what we're going to be focused on in most of the training today. The last part of the Obama administration's plan was to support low interest rates. And I don't know if they're solely responsible, but I will note that those rates still remain at historic low rates at this point. The MHA program was eventually expanded to respond to market conditions. There were not as many homeowners that were able to take part in the HAMP program as was hoped originally. So they've come up with different programs trying to capture more of those homeowners and provide more help. An honest assessment of the HAMP program is that I think there are people on both sides that are unhappy with it. You have folks that are on the more liberal side saying that this program isn't nearly as progressive as it should be, nearly as aggressive, and as a result you're not giving homeowners the help they truly need. You have people on the other side of the aisle that say, why are we helping homeowners that took out money they shouldn't have in the first place and weren't responsible, and this program should be taken out entirely. So I think that depending on where you stand, there are certainly issues that you can see within the HAMP program. However, I talked about how this is a very practical CLE, and regardless of what you think about HAMP, it is become the standard across the country with virtually all of the banks. Even when banks will look for a homeowner that doesn't qualify under the HAMP program, they oftentimes will try to mimic a lot of those details in their in-house modifications. So, for better or worse, HAMP is going to be what we're going to be utilizing. It was recently expanded out to December of 2015. So once again, it just goes to show that for an even longer time frame, we're going to have HAMP around. So we want to talk about how that program works. Sorry, the goal of HAMP, there's monthly mortgage payment down to 31%, and that monthly mortgage payment includes principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and any homeowners association's dues. It is only the first mortgage payment that they're looking at. If you have multiple mortgages, only the first. The program really had two goals. One was to provide some relief to homeowners. If you recall, at the time that this was rolled out, we had already had the bank bailout through TARP. We had the auto industry bailout, and then a second round of bailouts for the banks, TARP 2. And what a lot of people across the country were saying was, what about us? What about the little guy? Why isn't there any program to help the average Joe? And that was a big part of what this program was launched for, was to help homeowners. It also was launched to help stabilize the banks and the servicers. So I often have people say, well, this program was designed solely for homeowners. Why isn't it doing what we want it to do? I don't think that's necessarily correct. I do think there was a portion of it that was intended for the bank's benefit as well. And so there is a balancing throughout as far as the protections for homeowners, but also there are some things in there that are incentives for the banks. As far as qualifications for the HAMP program, the restrictions you see on your screen right now are fairly easy to determine, quickly rule out many situations. These are not the only eligibility requirements, but it's a good first pass. The eligibility is different for other Making Home Affordable programs. This is just for HAMP Tier 1, and as I said before, it has been expanded out through the end of 2015. So the idea of the origination is it has to be owner-occupied and primary residence. HAMP has been expanded to allow for modifications of second mortgages, non-owner occupied properties, so investor properties. However, today, for this purposes of this training, this is for working with homeowners that it is an owner-occupied house. So we're going to be focusing on that from that perspective. The origination date has to be before January 3rd, 2009. What they didn't want to have was homeowners that took a loan out after HAMP was announced, knowing that they could game the system and immediately turn around and try and get a HAMP modification on that loan. So as of right now, it has to have been before the HAMP program came into existence. You can see that there is an upper level limit on the value of the home. The homeowner does have to be delinquent or reasonably foreseeable default. And lastly, due to the regulations, there can be no real estate related felonies in the last 10 years. So another requirement is that the loan has to be either GSE owned or serviced by non-GSE participant in HAMP. What are GSEs? It stands for government-sponsored enterprise. The two big ones that you'll know are Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The non-GSE participants, I told you, we talked about the bank bailouts of a few years ago. The second round of bailouts, which was known as TARP 2, any banks that took money through TARP 2 were required to sign up to take part in the HAMP program. That was the Treasury and Obama administration's way of leveraging the bailouts to get them to buy into this system. There were some other banks that did not take money but did sign up to be a part of this program through some political hand-wringing. The largest, and so as a result, 90% or 89% of loans, the last I saw stat that I saw, 89% of loans are covered by either a GSE or a non-GSE participant in HAMP. The largest bank that's not part of it is HSBC. They didn't take money through the TARP 2. They had been subjected to some government regulations earlier in the 2000s, which they had very close oversight. As a result, I think they were very skittish to take part in that again. So they do not take part in HAMP. As a result, what you'll see is if you're working with a homeowner that's in that has an HSBC service loan, the terms of any potential modification are particularly onerous. HSBC, at least in the last policy that I knew of, and this was relatively recent, was they asked for 40% of all arrearages as a upfront payment in order to consider the homeowner for a loan modification. 9 times out of 10 with our clients, that rules them out. They do not have that kind of money sitting around for a down payment. Now, how can you figure out if the loan you're looking at is a Fannie, a Freddie, or a non-GSE participant in HAMP? There is a couple of great lookup tools. Fannie Mae has a lookup tool. It is at, I've got the website there, knowyouroptions.com. Simply put in first name, last name, address, city, state, and it will tell you whether or not it's a Fannie loan. Freddie Mac has got a similar website. We've got the information up here. Again, I found very easy to use. For non-Fannie or Freddie, you want to find out that whether a servicer is participating in HAMP. If you go to makinghomeaffordable.com, there is a list of all mortgage servicers that are taking part in any of the MHA, the Making Home Affordable programs. As you can see on the screen, what it'll show is not just the name of the bank, but also shows which participating programs they're in. So for Banco Popular de Puerto Rico, you can see they're in the FHA HAMP, the RD HAMP. For Bank of America, they take part in all of the HAMP programs, or all the MHA programs. So you can have banks that take part in HAMP but don't take part in some of the other MHA programs. So you can check there to find out which ones they participate in. I will note there's a spot for their mailing address for these banks. I absolutely would not use those addresses, or at least I would call the bank to confirm. Depending on what you're sending to the bank, they're going to have very specific addresses that they want everything sent to, and so I would definitely confirm with them before you send anything off. There's a lot of documentation that goes along with submitting a packet on behalf of a homeowner to get reviewed for HAMP. So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time going through the documents so that we make sure everybody's comfortable with where they are. And again, if people have questions, go to the question box on your screen. You can type those in, and we'll make sure we get them answered as we go. The first and most important document when you're looking to get a HAMP modification is the HAMP Request for Modification Affidavit, also known as the RMA. This form is used for all the MHA programs, and it's often asked for by banks or servicers, regardless of what program the homeowner is applying for. Again, I talked about how the HAMP has become somewhat the de facto standard. The forms capture a lot of information. So banks that even if they're looking at a homeowner for something that other than HAMP, they oftentimes will request the HAMP documents because they can pick up all the information they need to review it. So we're going to go through kind of page by page of the HAMP RMA, and I want to point out some things along the way. First thing I want to note is that the form it's 7 pages long. There is a lot of information they ask for, and there are certain spots that if you don't put information down, your entire RMA will be rejected, and you'll find yourself back essentially at the beginning of the process again, and sometimes. So I want to see if we can avoid that if at all possible. I put this box around in the middle with these questions. There's quite a few questions in there, and it's important that you answer every one. I had a case where the homeowner was not a service member. One of those questions is the borrower a service member, and I forgot to check no, and that was enough to get the whole packet rejected. I didn't find out for 2 months, so by that point I had to start all over again. So be careful to make sure you have each of those questions answered. The bottom section is the hardship affidavit. That's where you have to tell the bank why it is the homeowner fell behind. And there's check boxes there where you can say whether it's income reduction, expenses increased. You can see the other answers there. Here's the thing that I would note is that when the HAMP program was first launched, at least I know we were able to find that we could put down a very vague, very simple explanation. Homeowner lost their job and is now reemployed. And that was enough. The banks now seem to be pushing back and wanting much more specific information. They want dates as far as when did the person lose their job, when were they reemployed. Oftentimes what we will do is we will have either the homeowner themselves or we will work with the homeowner to write up a hardship letter, make sure that it's signed and dated by the homeowner and put their loan number on there, and then we'll attach it right to the RMA. and then we'll write in this explanation box, see attached. And that way we can put all the details we need and we're not limited in space to this small box. Second page, the bottom section, the top section I'll just look at briefly. The questions have to do with the property. Again, you want to make sure you answer all the questions. Most of them are self-explanatory. The bottom section is where you're talking about the budget. And so for this page, what you need to do is make sure that whatever income the homeowner has, it goes into whatever particular box, the corresponding box. So whether it's self-employed income, unemployment income, Social Security, food stamps, make sure you put it into the right corresponding box. You'll notice on the second column, it's for household expenses and debt. And they have a number of categories on here. But what they don't have is a category that captures utilities. They don't have a box that captures food, other normal month-to-month expenses. What we often do, and what I know from talking with other not-for-profits, housing counseling agencies, what they do is in the other box, they will put expenses and put the total, and then they'll add a second page to the RMA with a breakdown of the individualized expenses for that homeowner. So if the bank wants to see exactly how much they're spending on their cell phone bill, they have that on the separate page, but they at least have all the expenses in one spot. We seem to have somebody who doesn't have any sound, and I don't believe, I think that might be at your end, Roman. I'm not certain. I guess he can't hear me if he doesn't have sound, but we'll see if we can get him straightened out. All right, next slide here, page 3 of the RMA. Excuse me, we'll get a little technical difficulties. Skipped all the way to the end, so we got to go back a ways. Okay, so page 3 of the RMA, what the top section talks about is it tells you for each type of income that you would have, what you need to offer to the bank as far as proof. We're going to go through that in a second and go through each of those pretty closely. Fourth page of the RMA, I've put a big X through that, but you really should not do that. There is a question at the very top. I'm requesting mortgage assistance with a rental property. And then the second one, I'm requesting mortgage assistance with a second seasonal home. You have to answer no to those regardless of, especially if you're looking at it for the first mortgage on the owner-occupied house. So you don't want to put an X through the whole thing. You want to answer those 2 questions, and then the rest of the page is all unrelated if it's owner-occupied, so you don't have to answer any of the other questions. Page 5 of the RMA. I just want to point out, this is the Dodd-Frank certification that I talked about that says that you can't have had any real estate-related felony transactions in the last 10 years. It's built right in now to the RMA. In older forms of the RMA, it was not built in. There was a separate form the homeowner had to sign. I can just tell you from experience that even though it's built into the RMA, I still have banks that tell me that the homeowner needs to sign a separate RMA or a separate Dodd-Frank certification. In those cases, while certainly the banks are incorrect, sometimes I've taken the path of less resistance and just had the homeowner sign it in order to speed the process up. Just something to be aware of. Section 8, which is the information on demographic information, you don't have to provide that information. But if you're not going to, you have to check the box that says, I do not wish to furnish this information. I did have a case where nothing was put in any of those boxes, and the whole RMA was rejected, and we had to start from scratch. 6th page of the RMA, this is where the homeowner signs. I just want to point out a couple things. What this does, the language here authorizes the servicer to pull a credit report on the borrower and the co-borrower if there is one. It also authorizes, the homeowner authorizes the bank to call them on their cell phone, send them emails, and even send them text messages. Now, we have not seen any banks that have gone to those lengths of sending text messages regarding this, but I think it's worth at least noting for your homeowners that may happen at some point in the future. The last page of the RMA, at the very top, you have the homeowners hotline and the HOPP hotline. I want to point out that that is not the escalation for trusted advisors, which would be assumingly everybody on this call. We'll go over escalation later on, or maybe in the next session, but I just wanted to note that there is a different process that homeowners can use, and your homeowners, your clients, should feel free to call that number if they want. However, there's a separate, and I think a better escalation policy for trusted advocates. And again, we'll talk about that in a few moments. Now, I talked about income verification, that list in the RMA as far as what it is you have to provide in each situation. And I want to go over each of those a little closer. Easiest ones are wage and salary earners. In that case, typically pay stub to pay stub, the earnings are very similar. The banks will tell you that all the homeowner needs to provide is 2 pay stubs, but in reality what they're looking for is 30 days worth of pay stubs. So if you have a homeowner that gets paid every week and you try to send in 2 pay stubs, that's not, at the end of the day, that's not going to work. The bank's going to ask for more pay stubs. I always include, if I can, 40 days worth. I'll include an extra pay stub. If it's every other week, I'll include 3 of them, just to make sure that they're going to catch all the information they're looking for. If you have someone who has bonuses, tips, or commissions, those are obviously a little bit harder because they're not coming on a regular basis, and the amounts can vary so much. In those cases, what I would stress is that documentation is the key. I have had clients who have had quarterly commission checks. And what we did was we submitted the commission plan as well as the last 2 commission checks the homeowner had received. I had a case where we had a waitress where she got cash tips, and we were able to get the owner of the diner to sign a letter that said that she received on average $150 in cash tips every week, and the bank did eventually accept that as proof of income. So you have to sometimes get a little creative, but again, it's documentation that is the key. For self-employed people, you are going to want to have a profit and loss statement. The HAMP guidelines say that the profit and loss has to be year to date, not just the last 90 days. So you'll want to have, if you have a homeowner that has their own business, you want to get that started sooner rather than later. My experience is that homeowners that have their own business oftentimes have not been doing a profit and loss on a monthly basis during the year, and so it may take them a while to get that information together. If they have an accountant or a tax advisor, they may need to get them involved, so that can take a little bit longer. For benefit income, the important thing I think to note is that there are 2 parts to proving benefit income. You have to have the benefit letter, and that letter has to be up to date, showing that payments are still continuing. And also you have to show proof that you've received that. And so what that means is typically a bank statement showing that that money's either been electronically deposited or has been deposited by the homeowner. For rental income, there's a couple different things to point out for rental income. If you have a lease with someone, so this is a case where you have on your property that the homeowner lives in, they also have an apartment for rent, or they may even have somebody who lives in the house, but they the person rents a bedroom and has a lease agreement. If you have a lease agreement, what the banks are going to do is they're going to gross down 25% of that, and that's due to vacancy loss and maintenance expenses. And my understanding is that there is no way to overcome that presumption, at least not that I'm aware of. In addition, if you've had that tenant long-term, the bank is going to want to see a Schedule E from your tax return, which is rental income. And again, they want to see that lease and the proof that the payments have been received by the homeowner. Oftentimes we have homeowners who say, yeah, I've got somebody who pays me $300 a month. I just take the cash and I use that for groceries. If the homeowner is doing something like that, what we tell them is deposit that in your bank account, even if it means you have to pull it out the next day at least then we've got a record that we can circle saying, here's where that rent came in this month. Because without that, the bank has no proof the person's actually paying on it. Now, there is a difference between a renter and a boarder. So if you have a situation where you have somebody, let's say a mother-in-law, father-in-law who's living in the house with the homeowner, and that person has a monthly contribution to the household bills, but they don't have a lease agreement. They just have an informal agreement that says, oh, I will give you $250 a month for groceries. In that kind of a case, what the bank's stance now is that they need to be able to prove that that contributor is going to be able to afford to make those payments long term. The bank's stance is, for you, homeowner, we want proof of your income to prove you can afford it. And if you're relying on somebody else to give you money, we need to have comfort that they're going to afford it as well. Therefore, for anyone that's considered a boarder, the banks are going to want to be able to see their income verification, see their expenses, and even have potentially have a credit report pulled on that boarder. Oftentimes with our clients, what we've seen is that when we get to the point of explaining to them all the things that we're going to need to get from their boarder, either the homeowner or the boarder decides that they're not interested. They don't want that level of scrutiny on their documents, and they don't want their income counted if that's how it's going to have to be counted. What we have suggested to homeowners, that in some cases what makes sense in that situation is that you sign a lease with your boarder. And so therefore what you will have is a lease document and proof of the lease payments. If it's a lease, the banks are not going to need to see any of that other documentation regarding the proof of income or the proof of expenses for that person. All they need to see is a lease and the proof of payments. So that's one way to potentially get around that issue. Lastly, alimony and child support. If your homeowner is receiving either of those, again, they got to show proof of award and proof of receipt. If it's an informal agreement between parties, so husband and wife separate, and the husband agrees that I'll pay the mortgage payment, but there's no legal document that says that he has to, that's not going to be enough for the bank, because the bank stance is going to be that guy could walk away tomorrow and he's not on the hook to pay it. So it needs to be a formal agreement, whether that's a separation agreement or a divorce decree. But it is up to the homeowner whether or not they want to include that or not. It is optional. So if they decide, you know what, I don't want to include that income, they're not. They certainly have the right to do so. Next form is the IRS form, 4506T. What this does is allow the bank to request a copy of the homeowner's tax transcript to be sent directly to the bank. Here is the 4506T form, and again, there's some things I want to point out on here. On line 1A, you put your name down as shown on the tax return. However, on line 3, they then ask for your current name and address. So in reality, you're going to put your name down twice. I had a situation where somebody didn't put their name down on line 3. 4506T was rejected. It can take a while for these to be rejected by the IRS, which means that by the time you find out this has been rejected, some of your other documents, your income verification, those documents may have gone stale. Typically, income documents like that, the bank wants updated at least every 60 days, sometimes sooner. And so therefore, if you have one thing fall out, what it potentially sets off a domino scenario where all of a sudden you have to get all new documents to the bank. So you certainly want to avoid that if at all possible. Other things to note on the 4506T. On line 5, that is the address that the tax transcript is going to be sent to. I will tell you that the banks, again, very specific as far as where they send these to. Some banks even use a third-party company to gather these together and verify the information. What I would suggest is sometimes the banks will already have that line filled out on the form. If they don't, I would contact the bank to ask where it is that they want the 4506T sent to. Line 6, you typically are going to want to put the 1040 tax form, assuming that's what your homeowner filled out. Line 6A, the return transcript, you'll want to check this box. Line 9, this is where they ask for the year or the period requested. And they tell you the format they want is month, month, day, day, year, 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 year. So you have to put 12/31/2012 if you want your 2012 tax return, tax transcript. I have had cases where someone used 12/31/12. They didn't put 2012. That got rejected. Again, very particular about how to what you have to put in here. At the bottom, I'll just point out, you have a signature box. Next to the signature box, the date, and then a phone number for the taxpayer. And believe it or not, we had a case where somebody didn't have a phone, so we didn't put anything in there, and that got rejected. So again, you want to be very careful about that. Now, there is another form the IRS has called the 4506T EZ. It is supposed to be an easier form to use. And according to the HAMP guidelines, all banks are required to accept either 4506T or 4506T EZ. However, I have had a lot of issues with banks not accepting the 4506T EZ form or having problems with what is on there. Therefore, what we have done is we just use the 4506T for every homeowner. Again, just trying to avoid the potential hassle. Even though we know we're right, we'd rather get this thing completed and get it moving rather than try to force the bank to admit that they do have to accept a form, because that could take a long time, and meanwhile the homeowner's still sitting out there. So we use 4506T. Feel free to use the 4506T EZ if you'd like, just to warn you that it may you may lead to some problems. We have a question here about line number 9 again. So this is where you put the years that the bank wants to request the tax transcripts for. Typically with the banks, what I'll put down is the last 3 calendar years. So if you want the 2012 tax return, you put down 12/31/2012. 2011, same thing with 2011. But make sure you use the full 4-number year, 2011. Don't just put /11, because that can get it rejected. You have to have the whole thing written out. The last 2 things that you're going to put together in the HAMP packet are bank statements and tax returns. A couple things to note on bank statements. The banks want actual bank statements. They do not want printouts of your transaction history, which most people can get to these days online. The reason is that what the banks need is they need to see the name of the homeowner, the account number, the date of the statement, and the name of the bank. Typically, if you go onto your online banking, some of that information will not be on there for security purposes, and therefore the bank will not accept that as an official bank statement. Some people do get their statements sent to them electronically. If that's the case, it's just an electronic format of the paper, electronic format of the paper version, and it's going to include account number, name, bank number, and date. Those are okay. It's just the online histories that are not going to be sufficient. The banks ask for 60 days. We typically include 3 bank statements. The reason being that sometimes you have months that will you have a February thrown in there, and it's 20 days, and all of a sudden now you've got 2 bank statements that cover 59 days, and the bank says, sorry, we need 60 days, the mortgage servicer. We want to avoid that at all possible, so we include 3 months of bank statements when we can. For your federal tax return, a couple things to point out, because the bank does want not just, they're going to request a copy of the tax transcript from the IRS, but they also want the most current year's tax return sent to them directly. In that case, what you want to do is, even though most homeowners these days submit documents electronically, submit their taxes electronically, what you want to do, the banks require them to sign their tax return. So, if somebody submits electronically, at the bottom of the last page of their tax return, it will probably say for information purposes only, or submit electronically. What you want to do is have the homeowner, and if the homeowner filed with their spouse, have the spouse sign. They can sign it in the signature box. They can put today's date. We're not trying to fool anybody into thinking that it was submitted hard copy originally. But I always have them sign it because it has come back time and time again. Even when we submit the IRS form that says, yes, this was submitted electronically and we, the IRS, received it, that still does not, has led to huge issues with the banks. So to avoid that, again, we just have the homeowner sign that right on their first visit to make sure we have that. Okay. Before we go any further, I want to make sure that there are not any questions. We're running up. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to try to get through just a couple more slides, but I want to make sure there's no other questions out there. And if you have those, please get them in on the question page. Okay. I talked about the fact that the goal of the HAMP program is to bring your payment down to 31% of your gross monthly income as your mortgage payment. And that mortgage payment includes, again, first mortgage, principal and interest, taxes, insurance, and any homeowner association fees. So the first test then to see if this homeowner qualifies is the homeowner over the 31% threshold. So if the homeowner is paying less than 31% currently, they are not going to qualify for the HAMP program because the HAMP program is designed to bring that payment down to 31%. If the homeowner is above 31%, what's going to happen is the bank is going to do what's called a net present value test to determine if the loan qualifies. I know that when I went to law school, partly what a lot of people said was I went to law school because I heard there was no math. If that was the case for you, I'm sorry to say you were lied to. There will be some math involved in this. I promise you it's not too painful, but there are some numbers involved. So just to remind you, that 31% test that we talk about, we've already seen you can determine, at least on a rough basis, whether or not a homeowner is above that 31%. And I put arrows here to show you the boxes that we're looking at. So you're looking at first mortgage payment, principal and interest. You're not looking at second mortgage payment. That's not included. But first mortgage payment, homeowners, property taxes, and condo fees. So you've got the expense part of it. Income, you've got that on this column. So you can do the math to figure out is that ratio above 31% or not. It's a good first test to look at when you have a client come in the door and you're trying to figure out, is this somebody who I think might be HAMP eligible? It's a good, quick way to look at their numbers. And if they're at way above 31%, you very well may have a homeowner that has a chance. If it's around 31%, so you have a homeowner that's at 26%, I will submit their documentation for HAMP regardless, because sometimes the computations that I use and the numbers the bank end up using may be slightly off, and that may be enough to get them up. All they have to do is be at 31.0001%, and that's enough to say, yes, they're above it, and let's bring them back down to 31%. Now, that won't affect their interest rate much because it's going to be such a small change in the terms, but what it's going to do is take all those arrearage, all those missed payments, and it's going to spread them out over the course of the remaining years of their mortgage. So even if they're just above 31%, they may get sufficient value out of the HAMP program because it's going to allow them to keep their house and have a monthly mortgage payment that's going to be a reasonable amount. I think that I'm going to end here with the last couple slides for today, and then we'll pick this up in another couple weeks. And this is really, I think if you understand this slide, everything that's going to come at the next webinar will be a lot easier to understand. And that is the goal of the NPV test. Because the NPV test is talked about a lot, and it's I think, misunderstood by some folks. The goal of the test is very simple. When a bank makes a loan to a homeowner, they can forecast, if the homeowner makes those payments on time every month for the course of the entire loan, the bank can calculate today how much money are they going to make off of that loan. And they can calculate that down right to the penny. When a homeowner falls behind and can't afford to make their mortgage payments, the bank is going to make less money on that loan than they would have otherwise. That's a given. So the question then becomes, what's the way that's going to allow, which way is cheaper for the bank to go about doing this? If the bank forecloses on that property, there's a lot of different costs that come along with that. You have the actual costs themselves as far as attorney's costs, court fees. You have the fact that the bank, it's going to take quite a while for the bank to foreclose on that property. That whole time during foreclosure process, they won't be getting any payments in. You have the fact that once they foreclose, they're not going to be able to turn around and sell that property tomorrow. It's most likely going to be on their books for a while, and that entire time they have to pay taxes and insurance on that property. They have to maintain that property. Those are costs. When you sell a property that is in foreclosure, there is a stigma that attaches to that property. So I can take the exact same property and sell it through a traditional sale, and I'll sell it for $200,000. If I sell that exact same house, but it is a foreclosure house, the price will come down significantly. The number that I've seen thrown about is a 20% stigma discount. So that $200,000 house sells for $160,000 for no other reason than it was in foreclosure. So there are costs that are associated with foreclosing for the bank. On the other hand, the bank can modify a loan. If they modify the loan, the way they're going to do that is they're going to, under this program, and we'll talk about this next time, but they're going to lower the interest rate is going to be the first thing they look at. By lowering the interest rate, the bank is going to make less off of this loan over the course of the entire loan than they would have under the original terms. So that the NPV test, what it does is it looks and says, okay, bank, if you're going to foreclose, here's how much less you'll make on this loan. If you modify under the method that is required under the HAMP program, here's how much less you will earn off of this loan. It then compares the two numbers. If it is cheaper for the bank to modify, the bank has to offer your homeowner a HAMP trial modification. If it's cheaper for the bank to foreclose, the bank has the option of what they want to do, and 99 times out of 100, the bank will move forward with foreclosure proceedings. So the NPV test is very strictly a math-based test, and it is not designed to figure out what's best for the homeowner. It's designed to figure out what's cheaper for the bank. And I think that's the biggest misconception sometimes about the NPV test. It is, again, very much math-based. We're going to go through, in the next webinar, we're going to go through all the variables that go into NPV. We're going to go through examples of the NPV test. I'm going to show you the model the FDIC created. We will actually go through two examples of how a loan would be modified under the HAMP program, and we're going to go through step by step and talk about that. We'll also talk about if you get denied for a HAMP modification, what happens, how you will escalate it. If you get accepted for a HAMP modification, what are some of the issues that come up then? All of that we're going to save for the next webinar, but the most important thing for now is that NPV test and making sure people understand there's a lot of variables that go in, but it is all variable related, math related. The idea that I've seen people come to me and say, I think the bank failed this client because they didn't like him. And while I guess I can't discount that ever happens, somehow there was some chicanery going on. The program is set up that is very much a math-based test. And it was designed that way to take away some of this discretion that the banks were showing or not showing to homeowners, so that there was a standardized process. No matter what bank you go to, they all do HAMP the same way. Now, the last thing I'll note is that the NPV test it's designed, we're going to go through the model next time. Each of the banks gets to tweak the NPV model just slightly. So while the good news is there's a standardized test, the bad news is it gets tweaked bank to bank, and we don't always get to see how the banks have tweaked it. So while we can check on a lot of the information in the NPV test, we are never able to duplicate exactly what the banks do. That's something that organizations have pushed for a lot, but we haven't gotten the banks to open that up at all to people. Okay, we did have a couple questions here that I want to answer before I let people go. One question was, how are you calculating the 31%? Are you multiplying their income each month by 31%, or is there another way to calculate the payment? What we do in our office is we have a Excel spreadsheet that we use when homeowners come in where we do their budget. And what we determine is if they get paid, depending on how they get paid, if a homeowner gets paid twice a month, it's pretty easy to figure out their monthly budget, their monthly income. However, we have homeowners that get paid every 2 weeks. So technically they get 26 pay stubs in a year. In our budget spreadsheet, it automatically does the math. And so it will convert a 2-week pay stub, and it will tell us what that averages out to for a monthly basis. Because the banks are going to do that too. The banks are going to look at exactly what it is on a monthly basis. Even if you get paid every week, you get paid every 2 weeks, they still want to know monthly, and they're going to do the calculations to do that. If you're interested, let me know. And my email, I'll give you my email, and I can send you a copy of the spreadsheet we use for budget purposes. It's got formulas built in. You might find it helpful. My email is kpurcell, P-U-R-C-E-L-L, @empirejustice.org. And then the last question here, if the modification is cheaper for the bank must offer step 1 or may offer step 1. That was the question. The answer is they must offer step 1. They are required to, if it's cheaper to modify, they are required to offer a HAMP trial plan. And again, we'll talk about what that means and everything that goes along with that in 2 weeks' time. I believe that is all the questions that we have for now. So Michelle, I think you need to announce you're going to announce the CLE code for everyone.
Yes, I did put it into the chat box a little earlier, but for a verbal announcement, it's J as in Jack 7901. So record that code on your attorney affirmation and get it to me, and I'll send the CLE certificate out. And also, if anyone hasn't registered yet for the June 26th webinar, again, it'll be from noon to 1, email me directly, and I'll be happy to send you the announcement and register and be able to pick up where Kevin has left off today.
Thanks for everybody's time, and hopefully we'll be with you again in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone.